All right, can everybody, mic's on? Are we good? Perfect. Well, first of all, thank you for joining us, Dr. Reiser. Very happy. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes, you are.
Very cool. Very cool. All right, so I'm going to get started. My name is Rita Brewer, and I am the chair, and I've been on the board for 14 years. So, go ahead, we'll just go down to that.
I'm Daniel Quinn.
Grover May.
Eddie Pless.
Phil Essex.
I'm Veronica Watson, and I'm the student liaison.
Great.
Well, Dr. Reiser, would you just like to tell us a little bit about yourself, then we'll get started.
Okay. Well, I know you've all seen my resume, so I've been in education for quite some time. Before what you see on my resume, I grew up in Colorado, in the mountains of Colorado. I actually went to electronics school right out of high school and worked in Silicon Valley for a short time. Fortunately, I caught mono when I was out there, and I ended up going back home and got married, opened up my own little business that I ran for about 4 years. And in the Rocky Mountain West goes by cycles of boom and bust in the energy industry. And a bust cycle came along, so my wife and I went to college and studied education, kind of on the 7 or 8 year plan, because worked my way through college and then worked my way through many other degrees, and then got some opportunities to work in some great places in Wyoming and Hawaii, Colorado, and over in Boone, and then here I am today.
Well, the first question is, describe what you do in your current position on a daily basis. What aspects of this role do you enjoy the most and the least?
Okay, well, I'm gonna back up one slot because I had this great idea that I was going to do consulting, and that didn't work out so good this past year. I started yet another degree in public administration, and thinking that the consulting would pick up, and then coronavirus came along, and so that didn't work out. So I thought I should go back to working in a real job. So I applied here. What I've done in my previous school job and before that, a daily basis, was really running everything. I worked at schools that were independent, so I functioned as basically the superintendent principal. So I took care of whatever I could change my hat on, from human resources, federal grants, hiring supervision, instructional supervision, pretty much just whatever came along that day. That was what I was taking care of.
Any parts of your job that's kind of your least favorite things?
Oh, student discipline. There's no doubt about that one.
I find that encouraging, so that's good. Anybody have any questions or anything on this? The director of schools is undeniably the leader of the system. Define what leadership and integrity mean to you.
I think leadership is setting an example. That goes along with integrity. Doing things the way you want other people to do them, being seen in that way as people think about how they're approaching things. They say, how did the leader do things? If you're kind of half-baked about how you do things, you can expect that other people are going to say, oh, okay, I don't have to do that very well. So I think really upholding the highest standards you can and giving direction in a sense of this is where we want to be, not hovering over people saying this is exactly what I want you to do, because that's why we hire professionals in education, because they're supposed to be able to do those things. But really setting the tone, setting an example, and being a resource for folks. There's a lot of folks who really need to think things through, and they need someone who has some experience that they can talk to and bounce things off of.
Is it follow-up? Tom?
Yes, absolutely.
Can you give an example in your current role where you've used integrity in your leadership, where you've had to use that concept that you mentioned of setting an example or setting the tone?
Yeah, well, let me go through one of those discipline things that I don't enjoy. We had a student who another student reported had been playing a Nazi game on the playground, and just the word got a lot of parents inflamed, teachers inflamed. I was pressured to do something illegal, which was expel a 12-year-old from school. And rather than being reactive, I really investigated. And yes, this child was doing that. But investigating farther, there was this little group that unfortunately didn't have a lot of parental supervision and were playing video games. And at the time, I had no idea these games existed, but it was being a Nazi was the video game. And that's what they were doing on the playground. So we backed up and had a long talk about the whole thing and helped them understand that was not an appropriate thing to be doing.
In a perfect world, directors of schools would never have to make unpopular decisions. But we don't live in a perfect world. So tell us about a time you needed to make a difficult decision as an administrator. Explain your decision-making process when faced with making those types of decisions.
Yeah, the last time we were facing a recession in 2008, 2009, I found out a month before school started that we would be taking a 25% reduction in funding. So there was a whole range of unpopular decisions that needed to be made. So I called together, as school started, did a lot of meetings with staff, teachers and support staff, parents and community, and really laid out the things that were in the budget, things that we couldn't really change, the insurance and all of that. And the things that we could, which, could mean reducing teachers, could mean reducing travel, all of those sorts of things. And that process, which kind of scared me at the time, turned out to be really nice. There were a few ideas, and I can't remember what they were now, but they really looked at things differently. It was really nice to get that different feedback. We were able to not make any horrible decisions. It was refocusing how we did some things. There were some reductions, but it really made us much stronger in the end. We really were much more efficient. And then when funding started to come up again, we were able to do some things that with travel, with student support, that the school really could use.
So one of the great things about our community is that everyone is very invested in our school system. So when difficult decisions are made, we see a lot of people show up at our meetings, which is great. But tell me about how you're going to handle that if you are sitting here.
Hopefully, there'll be an opportunity to really do the background, like I was just talking about, having some meetings, having some input, so that as those things those decisions are being made and people are showing up, there'll be a good rationale that can be outlined for them. Folks, there'll still be folks who aren't happy, but really need to have some sort of data, some sort of rationale, some sort of be able to tie to some sort of agreement that people that do represent some of the folks that show up have been consulted and where that decision came from.
Anybody else? Any follow-up?
Along with that, how would you include others in those tough decision-making processes, as far as staff or whatever?
Of course, it really depends on what the specifics are, but I'd really, I'd probably start with, principals, and talk with them, get a feel for how they see things, possibly then meet with their staff, or maybe they'll meet with their staff and come back. If it's something that really affects the community, I really think there needs to be an opportunity for community folks in some fashion, whether it's in person or whether you have some sort of a survey that goes out, something where you can get that feedback to help you make those decisions.
So let's say for a moment that it's a community issue, because it is hard. I recognize the difficulty of asking broad questions, and you're kind of trying to think of scenarios where there may be conflict. But let's just imagine that it's a community issue and it has to do with, say, a funding of a project or something of that nature. How would you attempt to engage the community in say, a controversial funding project? Let's go with that. Just something that needed funding, and there's a group of people who want that and a group that don't. And so how do you begin to reconcile that with the district's desire or needs as a superintendent?
Yeah, I think I would probably start with some type of a survey to get feedback and get a good temperature check for how people are feeling. If it seems really divided, find some way to do more of an in-person meeting. I kind of reluctant to open things up to the big crush of people yelling immediately. Get some sort of representation to do some focus work, and we may end up at that bigger crush of people. But I like to do things a little more strategically to get an idea of how people are feeling, and then get some ideas from folks in person.
Okay.
Anybody else? Have you personally been involved in setting school budgets? And have you worked with local funding bodies to secure funds needed for those budgets?
So, yes. The institutions I've worked with, there hasn't been a lot of flexibility. I mean, there's a certain amount we're going to get, and that's what we get. The budgets, yeah, I write the budget every year. It's pretty much my thing to do, and then any of the things that are a little bit flexible, I get input from others, a lot of teacher input, and then I'll take that to the board for board input, and we'll go from there. Other funding, the places I've been, it's been much more trying to find some private grants and so forth, but no funding bodies that I've had available to go negotiate with.
Do you grant write, or do you go find people that's their skill set, or is that part of what if you're looking for outside money?
Both. I've done both.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Anybody else? If you are tasked with becoming the director of schools for Elizabethton, what types of people will you need to build your support team to help you become a successful director of schools?
I need people who are willing to tell me the truth. I need people who are connected to schools and the communities, that kind of have their ear to the ground. Being the leader, you don't always have people who will tell you things that you ought to know, whether they're community or in the schools. So it's always nice to have those sorts of folks who know, they're at soccer on Saturday and they hear all the talk, and they can say, oh, this is what folks are talking about, and you might have had no idea, so that you can address those sorts of things. Also need some of the expertise in areas, some of the financial expertise, federal grants. Right now, really need some expertise in school safety and logistics as we look toward coronavirus and opening up. There's something that really concerns me. It's how schools are going to get open again. So some experts in different areas are really needed.
It's interesting you brought that up. One question I had was about coronavirus, and if we were going to, knowing what we know today, which is, in my mind, what we don't know, and knowing how funding has been affected, we're dependent upon so many outside sources, but outline maybe a plan of, if knowing what you know today, for how you might handle this coronavirus pandemic in terms of our school system, knowing we have 5 buildings and five schools to think of particularly.
I was hoping I'd get to ask you that.
We'll work together if you're hired, and we'll figure it out, because we've got to educate these kids.
Yeah, there are so many moving parts to opening school. Figuring out what are going to be those variables that are acceptable and not, like buses. Are we willing to do full buses? Are we going to try to have kids keep on masks? And then the classrooms themselves, are we going to try to keep kids 6 feet apart? And are we going to have masks in the classrooms? And thinking through, kids are not being infected at as high a rate as people who are older, but the kids who are infected are getting that horrible syndrome. So we have to be careful, but we also have to worry about our staff and our teachers who, and parents. So as a plan, I would be cautious, very cautious. I mean, I'm very much about masks. I would love to see how that's working with the little kids. That's a tough one. And how we can protect our teachers who are going to be exposed to those things. So as far as having a plan in my pocket, I don't have that, but.
Well, neither does the CDC or
Yeah.
I think Dr. May was going to bankroll that if you had a good one.
the Department of Tennessee Department of Health, or anybody else. They keep changing the plans.
I just
I
saw
appreciate
what the Department of Education in Tennessee released, and I was all excited till I saw it said, here's all the things you can consider, with no help of what we ought to do.
Absolutely. It's what we don't know. But I was particularly interested in your decision-making and your pathway for where you would seek information, and I think you kind of answered that.
Okay.
So thank you. And I know that's, I don't expect you to solve all the world's problems, but while you're at it, if you want to touch on world peace.
No, you have to do it this way, world peace. You have to do world peace.
Yeah.
This is why we keep him over here. He's close so that I can,
We just need to be nice to each other.
There you go. So tell us about a time you failed at something as a leader. How did you handle it? What did you learn, and how would you handle that situation now?
I've been fortunate to be in positions where I haven't had what I call big failures where everything blew up, but I usually try to look at contingencies along the way so that if things are not going the way you want, you have another route rather than putting all your chips in and this is it, take it or leave it. So I haven't been there. So, coming up with a failure, the closest thing that comes to my mind is implementing looping. And it actually worked out great, but it's something that where I did that, there was only one class per grade level. So there was one first grade teacher and one second grade teacher, and they would go first to second, second back to first. And doing it the first 2 years was great. And then as we're going to the next 2 years, well, then there were parents who, oh my God, I never want my child to have that teacher. And for 2 years, that's unacceptable. So have to start the whole process of surveying and talking to folks again, and then would always find out that, oh, there's like 3 people that are upset and everybody else wants to do it. And so do it again. And yeah, I went through like 2 cycles of that, realizing that, oh, maybe I need to keep sending out information on a regular basis, explaining looping and what we're doing, so that we don't have to revisit it every couple of years.
So the last question, I'm going to turn the floor over, and Veronica is going to ask the
Okay.
question.
Hi, as the student liaison, it is my job to speak on behalf of the students and voice their concerns to the board and also ensure that their voices are heard. With this in mind, I would like to know, in what ways will you honor student voice as superintendent?
First of all, I think it's really great that there's a student on the board. And I'd love to have a visit, you know, maybe every month. There's monthly board meetings. It'd be really nice to stay in touch. Are you primarily concerned with high school, or do you get to the other grades?
I spend most of my time at the high school,
Yeah.
so that's what I'm exposed to the most, but I do care a lot about the middle school and elementary schools, and I've tried with my work through the Bartley program to start working with elementary, so that is something I will be looking at.
Yeah, I think that would be, I'd really like to talk with whoever the student liaison is, or if there's a small group, to get a feeling for what students want or they feel like is missing, or something that could make things better, because obviously I won't be at the high school all of the time. I'll be hearing everything. And yeah, even to hear about, oh, back when we were in 4th grade, this would have been nice. So yeah, I'd love to talk with students. In fact, that's one of the things about this position that I worry about, is being more removed from students.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have any other questions?
In your red,
Just
go ahead. No, you go first.
Oh, it's kind of a follow-up. Does the school still loop? Or did you, I'm just out of curiosity.
Yeah, that was
Is that, I mean, it may be too far removed, but
yeah,
okay.
I don't know that they still
Okay.
loop or not.
Okay,
I
I'm
know
just
they did
curious.
for a few years.
Okay. Just curious.
Building off of my question, so even just taking it one step beyond listening, I would like to know maybe a few examples, or just how you think you might work towards action with some of the things students have concerns, because we certainly have some concerns. I've heard plenty, and I would love to work on actually making progress with some things. So I was wondering how you would be receptive to action.
Yeah, again, without specific, it's a little hard. I can
Yeah.
think of one specific I did in the past, which was some students came to me to talk about dress code. And, you know, it made a lot of sense. The dress code was written so that, you know, we had you know, like we had girls who were dressed like nuns, basically. It's like, yeah, maybe we should loosen that up a little. So I worked with a student group to rewrite that, and then took it to the board to have a new dress code enacted.
Awesome. That answers it perfectly. Thank you.
Sounds like you might have touched on something that was
Yeah.
current.
I have a funny feeling I know what we're going to be having a talk about at some point.
So, in your resume, you mentioned that you had worked with STEM-focused charter school. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between charter schools and public schools, and your role here as a public school with regard to funding in charter schools here?
Yeah, that's a big discussion, charter schools and regular public schools, because there's so many different interactions. I don't know exactly what the relationship is with funding and so forth in Tennessee, but I do know there's, as far as attitude toward charter schools, there's many types of charter schools. So there's the big corporate-run charter schools, which technically are nonprofits, and they hire management companies, and they're big for-profit companies. And that's where a lot of the bad press comes from, is those folks who are there to make money. The schools that I've worked with have been in independent schools. People with the right motives, they wanted something special, something different, made a school. And a lot of nurturing of children. Most of the ones I worked at were very STEM focused, very environmentally focused. And so that was a lot of the programming was centered around that. Funding so for example, in Hawaii, the funding was completely separate. So there wasn't a lot of argument about that. Where I'm at in North Carolina right now, the funding is also separate. There's a little more more of an uncomfortable relationship, because more of those corporate type schools that I'm talking about, and that's what a lot of complaints are about. So you see a lot of that in the press about those types of schools. I have dealt with a few places that the school district actually money comes from their funds to the charter school. And I'm torn about that. I think the model's wrong to begin with. And so it just sets up that argument. I would love to see charter schools in that situation become what way back the idea was, which was a place for experimentation and doing things differently, that then could be looked at by the regular public schools as possible changes that could be made. So I really would love to see, in that situation, those charter schools become more like magnet schools that are doing something different. And if the money's being carved out of the school district, well, let's make it more of a district support type of a program.
Okay. We don't have any in our region right now, but they report through this board if they do. And I believe their funding would be cut out of our budget if they did come up.
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, it sets it up for bad feelings from the beginning.
Any other questions or comments? Any questions or comments?
My big question was the coronavirus question. I'm just wondering if you guys have an outline of what you're thinking, or where that's at.
I don't think the board has one. I think the supervisors have a group that are working with other school districts, because kind of just geography-wise, that the places are a little bit different from hot spots and things like that. So I think that, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't know, Mr. Hutchins may be able to say, but there are going to be a lot of options, and then when somebody's on board, I would imagine that's going to be the first big thing, but I don't know. I know that there's work going on, but we don't have a report on anything.
I think that when this started back in the spring, the area districts kind of met, and they sort of tried to work as a corporate body rather than having a lot of rogue things
Good,
happening.
good, that's encouraging.
Well, and it helped because it just gave I think the region a sense of community, and that, you don't have one school that's doing this and the other's doing something else.
Exactly.
So that's been helpful. I know that, as Mr. Pless talked about, it is happening within our system, some plans, but again, we're kind of going to be dependent on the health department, like what they tell us. So we have ideas, but where we're going to land,
Yeah, and as I said earlier, this is a virus that more what we don't know than what we do know. And you can see from the interview characteristics, there's, different than what we would normally want to do, socially distanced, and, we're sitting more than 6 feet away. It's not ideal, but, we have to do what we have to do. We've engaged, the teachers have done a phenomenal job this year. At the end of the year, to overcome, the hurdles of still educating. But I think that's an area that this board will have to get greater involved, and we're going to need a strong director to do that, who will make those decisions with us and help us find a way, because our first duty is to keep our children safe, and then we need to educate them, and they're falling behind if we don't engage them even better than we did. With distance learning techniques and things of that nature, but we live in a district where not everybody has the same access to internet and computers and technology, and so we have some hurdles. I was really proud of our district for the way they handled making sure that some of the community services that necessarily fall through the school system, like feeding the children who wouldn't otherwise have food, those things were protected and continued to happen. And I know that they worked really hard for that. So I think that you'll find no greater group of people to help you get that project done. But the reason I asked you previously was because I want to know how you deal with limited information and making decisions when there isn't a blueprint. So thank you.
One of the things with this director search, we have went at a quick pace. I've kept things popping along, but the idea was, we start the school year starts next month,
Right.
and I really wanted to have that person in place so that they were directing where we were going, rather than have them come in a month or two later, try to play catch up. Maybe they wouldn't have done the things that the interim had done. So that's why we have moved at a quicker pace than you would normally. But given where we are, we just really want, as quickly as we can, to have the person sitting here ready to say, okay, assembling my team, meet the area other directors, and be as prepared as we can possibly be to move forward. So it's a little unconventional, but what isn't right now? So
Yeah, everything's unconventional right now. Yeah.
anything else? All right. Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to meet you, and we're going to let you just visit with everybody for next 10, 15 minutes, and then we'll get on with the next one. So thank you.
Thank you for coming.
We have to introduce ourselves since we all know each other. It's always I always find it interesting when you're interviewing people you know. It makes it easier and it makes it harder. So we're just going to go ahead and let you get started like we don't know you. So tell us about yourself.
My name's Travis Thompson. Live here in Carter County. Worked for the school system here for 3 years now. Started in education back in 2007 in a different district. Worked as a teacher, assistant principal, and a principal. And then now here as a supervisor. Have a family, wife and 2 children who are at the beach right now tormenting me. Been in the Marine Corps. I've got a very diverse background. I've been in the Marine Corps for over 25 years now, and still I'm active in the Marine Corps Reserve. Still drill and support the country as best I can, alongside working in education. So it's great to be able to have both roles, be able to impact on both sides.
Wonderful. We'll go ahead and get started. So describe what you do in your current position on a daily basis. What aspects of this role do you enjoy the most and the least?
So on a daily basis, I have a lot of responsibilities, and everything from data services to testing to attendance, voluntary pre-K. So day to day, especially recently, has been dealing with the pre-K budget, closing out the prior year and working on this upcoming year's budget. So we've been spending a lot of time doing that. A lot of communication, have a lot of contact with parents right now as they're registering, calling with questions. I also deal with the homeschool side. Have a lot of parents right now reaching out, closing out their year as homeschool parents. So day to day, a lot of interaction with community members, a lot of interaction with staff, and a lot of interaction daily with principals, which is very important. What do I like most? That's a very hard question, because I really enjoy all the aspects of my job. But what I like most, especially right now, I think is working with pre-K teachers, working with the pre-K kids, because you understand and realize you're setting that foundation and the foundational skills for those young children as we bring them into our great school system. So being able to work hand in hand and get those children in, and the most needy children that we know that need it the most, is extremely important for retainment, to keep them here in our school system so that they're comfortable coming to the school system, and realizing you have an impact. One day you're going to see them in pre-K, and then you blink and they're graduating high school and hopefully going out to be successful citizens in society. The least, that's a pretty difficult one. The least, I was going to say probably not having a good hot coffee mess while COVID was going on. But the least is probably when you're dealing with budget and you're trying to get answers from our state level, and you're trying to get the right answers to make the right informed decisions. That's probably the least, most frustrating part of the job, because a lot of times you just get the general answer, we just don't know. But here we are in real time trying to make the best informed decisions we can. So we're having to do that by doing our own research and figuring things out and talking to, for instance, other pre-K directors in our district to try and come together and figure out the right answer whenever you're not getting it. So the least is just a lack of good communication coming from our lawmakers in our state office.
The director of schools is undeniably the leader of the system. Define what leadership and integrity mean to you.
In this position, in any position I've ever been in, leadership comes to play. And having an extensive, diverse background, I've been able to see leadership in many different aspects. And one thing that comes to mind when I think about leadership is John Maxwell's 5 steps. And you know and you understand the level 1 is people follow you because they have to. But when you get to the pinnacle, the level 5, people follow you because of who you are and what you represent. And I think that's most important. And as I look back, I try to put myself in a place, where did it begin? Where did leadership begin? And you start at one point, you're not automatically level 5. You've got to build yourself to that point. And the first thing that comes to mind is the high school marching band. And as I think about it, I think, well, why would that come into mind? Well, as a leader, you set goals. And I think that's one of the main times in my life, as I can remember, I set goals. We had a mission. We were driven by those goals. And you begin to understand you can be a leader as a high schooler. You can be a leader at whatever age you are. And leading in the brass section, everybody has their own responsibility. You begin to understand that. And then I think about it at a young age of 17, going off to Marine Corps boot camp. Show up, you go through all your training, then you go to your schooling. And then coming back home and being assigned to Lima Company here in Johnson City, and I'm responsible for an armory at the age of 18 with multi-millions of dollars worth of weapons, material, gear, inventory. And you begin to learn the responsibility aspect, the integrity side of what it means to carry yourself and be responsible for such a large piece of government property, and how that responsibility is, the readiness of keeping that armory in shape is of utmost importance in being mission capable and ready. And then I go on to think about singing in the choir in college, in opera. You set goals. You don't get there without having a goal. You've got to set the goal. And people start leaning on you, and you realize you're a leader even inside that. And then I move into education as a teacher, as a coach. First thing we ever do is set a goal. We have a mission. We teach our kids responsibility, integrity. It's of utmost importance. We develop relationships, build upon those relationships, trust each other. Even as an assistant principal, and especially as a principal, understanding that leadership is not just one way. There's multiple aspects. Relationship is huge. If you can't build the positive relationships, you'll never move forward. But also understanding that a very important role as a leader is making tough, difficult decisions. And those aren't easy as a principal. They're not easy as a leader, and being able to separate professional from personal to make those decisions. And is it grounded in policy? Is it grounded in fact? Can you make an on-the-spot decision? Leadership encompasses so much. The integrity side, the relationship piece, positive relationships, working in this position as I am now, as a director of schools, you get to see, you understand the importance, the relationship with the funding body, having integrity. Can they trust me? Can they trust us as a board? So leadership, we could go on and on and on. It's something important. I'm a level 5 leader. People follow because of who I am and what I represent. And it takes a lot to develop that, but it's possible, and I can continue to do that.
You said that, you kind of already almost answered it, but you said that you see that you're that level 5 leader, right? Well, starting with this position, there are going to be some people who, like me, I've never met you before.
Sure.
So how will you work with these new relationships, get to that level 5? And how will you work to build those trust and relationships?
Sure. Absolutely. There's always a fear. You have a new leader come in, they don't know you well, but it all ties into the relationship piece, open door policy, working in the community to continue to develop the relationships, a good continuity, building upon where we're already at with our local community, with our local government, but definitely an open door relationship. People got to understand that you're going to sit and listen to them, that you're going to carry on a conversation, that you hear them, that you understand what they're having to say, and that you're real. You want them to understand that you care about people, you love people, and you have a passion. Otherwise, you can't be a director of schools. You have to have all those things. But once they realize that, and it may take time, and that's understandable, but once you build that trust aspect, it's unlimited on what you can accomplish.
Thank you. Anybody else?
In a perfect world, directors would never have to make an unpopular decision. But we don't live in a perfect world. Tell us about a time you needed to make a difficult decision as an administrator. You don't have to be, obviously protect the innocent. Explain your decision-making process when faced with making those difficult decisions.
So I probably grew exceptionally a ton as a building level principal. I think until you're in that role and you can see. Before I was a principal, you always wondered what was going on up there. You're trying to figure out why in the world is the door shut today? What's going on? And until you live it, until you've been in that position and you understand, as I mentioned before, understanding how hard it is to make difficult decisions. I've been in a position as a principal where we had to cut a tenure teacher loose. We had to make it wasn't very popular, but at the end of the day, when you've exhausted all means, you've had discussion, you've given chances, you've talked to them, and when you sit back and say, I've done everything in my power, I've done everything I can to try and work with this person to build them, to grow them as a teacher, but then there comes a time when you have to make a difficult decision. So we made that difficult decision. It wasn't very popular, but it was completely grounded in fact. It was completely grounded in policy. It was hard, but you still have to do it. You have to separate personal from professional, and you have to make those decisions from time to time. And they're not easy. They're not easy. But as a leader, and you have high expectations, you hold yourself accountable, you hold everybody accountable, you have to make the decisions, and sometimes they're hard. And I wish there was a perfect world, and we didn't have to.
In making that decision, who did you involve and what process did you go through?
So initially, the building level administrators were involved, district personnel, and it went on for a while. Board ended up being involved because it was a decision to be made on employment. As it went on, the district attorney was involved, TEA representatives, and impartial hearing officer, a judge that came to hear the case. So initially you start your investigation at the building level, but at the same time you're communicating with your direct supervisor or the director of schools. They're always in the know. They're helping you on the decision making. Now ultimately it was the director of schools at the time that made the decision to move forward, and then it was a board vote, and it lasted for quite a while. So there's a lot of people involved, and facts, I keep going back to facts and notes and being specific on how and what you're using to advise your decisions on that is of utmost importance.
In some hard decisions, there are a lot of different inputs coming in. So like if it's something regarding how a teacher is performing, you have a lot of different people's opinions coming in to influence that decision. So I would just kind of wonder, you don't have to be super specific, but how would you kind of rank the different opinions between like student opinion and teacher opinion and board opinion and community opinion? Like how would you weight each one roughly?
Yeah, it's definitely, you're going to get all sorts of opinions, and a lot of them are off the hip. You want to listen to people, but again, if it's not grounded in strong fact, if it's not grounded in evidence, it's hard to have a good, legit opinion about someone or a teacher per se or what it is. But you listen. If a student wants to come in and talk to you, the door's open as a leader. Come in and talk to them. If a community leader, and a lot of times it helps you. They can get their opinion off their back. It makes them feel better. You're listening. But when it comes to making decisions, again, I say it's grounded in fact. But ranking, there's not one. A board member may not outrank what a student's opinion is. The students, and they're living it from day to day. And then by the time it maybe gets to a board member, it's either not what it, it's misread, overthought. So not one outranks. Everybody's input's important. Everybody's input is important.
Thank you.
One of the best things about this community is its absolute investment in our students. And when difficult decisions are made, very often we have a lot of people who come to meetings upset, they're angry, they're very mad at the director. If you're sitting right here, how would you handle that?
Again, it's important to listen, and you have to be thick-skinned, but you have to be open-minded. You're not always right. And if you sit in that position and you want everybody to agree with you, then you're never going to make progress. You don't want yes people. You want disagreement. Let's talk about it. Let's research and figure out the best way to move forward. But you have to listen to people, whether you agree with them or not, whether they're angry. That's one of the best advices I ever got from a mentor when I was taking over an administrative position. I said, Travis, you're going to want to get mad. You want to fire back. But you can't do that. They just want to talk. They may be angry, but just sit back and listen to them. You may learn something, but once they get it off their chest, they're going to feel better. And in listening to them, it may help you make informed decisions. If that's a general consensus and you find out across the board, across the community, then maybe we need to take a step back and look at something, look at an issue. But it is a very tight-knit community. I understand that completely. And people are very, very involved and heavily invested. And you can see that anywhere you go, inside the city or outside the city. You see Elizabethton City Schools, placards in yards. You can drive 20 miles, you'll find them. So within a city without, it's tight. And the importance of listening to those issues and problems and not overreacting, it's of utmost importance, and I completely understand that.
Have you personally been involved in setting our current school's budget, and have you had the opportunity to work with the local funding body at all to help secure funds needed?
So this year's budget, I've had some input on different aspects. I bring back specifically voluntary pre-K, which is a fairly sizable budget to manage, as well as some other small budgets inside of that deal with data, testing, etc. The budget as a whole, I've been able to review some of it, look it over, help with some if Dr. Gardenauer is asking on some questions or advice, been able to give input in regard to that. As far as the funding body itself, the local funding body, haven't had a lot of dealings with the local funding body. I do understand the importance of that positive relationship with them, and I understand the weight it puts on the funding body's back, whereas the state on an average funds around 50% of our budget, and 40% of that roughly comes from our local taxes, etc. So I understand the importance that's put on them when we're trying to decide where to best spend our funds and allocate those funds.
In your role with the Marines, with Lima Company, any input on the budgets there?
So budget-wise, that's with the Marine Corps, you're kind of given what you get. So it's similar, though. It's a ratio to how many Marines do we have? Look at the ratio, what are we going to fund? You have 140 Marines in the company, you're going to get X amount of rifles, X amount of large weapons, X amount of gear. So funding-wise, you deal with more, on the funding side of that, you're dealing more with repairs, maintenance, things of that aspect. But the way they do their budget is more on the ratio aspect of how many you have versus what you're going to obtain.
Similar to BEP funds.
What's that?
Similar to our BEP funding.
Yes.
If you are tasked with the Director of Schools position for Elizabethton, what types of people will you need to build your support team to help you become a successful Director of Schools?
Ultimately, it comes down to the trust aspect. You want to have an executive committee beneath you that you can trust. You can trust that they understand their responsibilities, they understand their jobs, they understand what your expectation for them is. If you can't trust your internal support network, and that goes down to the principals as well, and we have some of the best and work great with them already. But if we lose a trust factor and we lose a trust between us and that relationship piece, you're not going to be productive, or it's going to be extremely hard. So building that network, and I think it boils down to expectations and responsibilities, and that everybody understands their roles. But once you do that, and once you have that established, as the director, you can delegate. You can trust your internal people, your executive committee, I like to call it, to make informed decisions, to do what you're asking. But it's all about understanding my expectations as a director of schools, and that there's never a question, but that I can trust 100% that team.
You've mentioned trust several times. Simon Sinek describes a circle of trust. Are you familiar with that? Circle of trust?
Who was it? I'm sorry.
Simon Sinek. I just wondered if you're familiar with that. He described the circle of trust, and I was wondering, you can still reflect upon the trust aspect as a leader. How have you used that in your current position, that trust that you've developed with others or that you require?
Sure.
So it's specifically here, at this example.
Right. I think it's natural for people to, especially when they first meet you, or when you take over a role and you may be in charge of somebody different or overseeing something different, it's natural for people to, even for me, you set a distance, you set boundaries you don't initially want to trust. So it's something you have to build. I think in doing that, it's all about being yourself, not hiding behind blinders, not being fake. I always said, I am who I am, you get what you get. I told my wife that. But it's about setting the boundaries, and your door's open. And once the people, I think specifically when I took over pre-K and started as the director of pre-K, the teachers were, because they had a good director before them, and they hated to lose them. and in knowing that, they trusted. So when you go in, they're very standoffish. But I think now the relationship I've been able to build with those ladies it's hard to explain. It's great. To know you started here, I know they're standoffish, but now to see them trust you, making decisions with the budget, with enrollment, to help them to drive, secure, and help them be able to do and be successful. It's neat to see. And you can look at support staff up here, stop and talk to people. Just be yourself. And make sure, like I've said it numerous times, make sure they understand that the door's open. Come in and talk to me, sit down. You want a coffee? I'll grab you a coffee. I've got coffee in the office. It's little things. It doesn't have to be huge. Just be yourself and just love it. You just love people. That's what it boils down to.
Tell us about a time that you failed at something as a leader. How did you handle it? What did you learn? And how would you handle that situation now?
I think specifically back to the days of running a building as a principal. And communication's of the most important. You got to communicate with your people. They want to hear from you. I remember a time pushing out some communication, and boy, it made sense to me. It made all the sense in the world. Time it got to the teachers, the stakeholders. I believe it was my assistant principal came back and said, we need to work on that because they don't have a clue what you just said. So in communicating, that helped me to probably grow even more, thinking about communication, reading things, having somebody else read it before you send it out, making sure it's right. When I took this job, I was told by Dr. Gardenauer, Travis, when you have the answer, it's got to be right. When you deliver the information, it has to be right. So I felt at communicating initially, learned a ton from it, and changing it now, reading it more than once, having somebody, if it's steps to do something, having somebody else read it, so you're not having to fire out multiple emails to correct yourself. And they help me grow a lot. It seems minute, but one word can mess up can mess something up completely when you're trying to communicate something. That could be really good or it could be for really bad. So the importance I learned in that was extreme.
So you've mentioned a lot how you value communication in general. How would you strengthen communication between just schools at a local area? So communicating between students and teachers, and how would you help to aid in that?
That's an excellent question. And I think we're seeing that more than ever even now with the COVID shutdown and relying on communication and how we're communicating to get to our parents, our students, and teacher-student interaction. You mentioned it. So the support from the director of schools, again, is having that expectation, setting up guidelines and boundaries on how we're going to communicate. Are we going to use one platform, emails, and thinking about security in that as well. But it's important to support that because just as important it is for myself as a director of schools to communicate out to everybody, all stakeholders, it's just as important for that teacher communicating with their students. So devices are important. How are we going to bump up the devices? If there's not, you have to look at all the aspects on communication. Is it a newsletter? Are we using social media, which we currently use? What are the trends? What are people using? And what are the best ways to reach? And part of that is by surveying our people, our stakeholders. How would you like us to communicate? You know, it may be a year in and we got to back up and resurvey. What are the best measures we can use in order to deliver our message, in order to, if it happens again, which we're planning for, you know, a plan B, we shut down, what's the best way to communicate and how can we do it and make the equity across the board, because not all households are the same. So finding that equity in it and the best ways to do that, support it. So it's all driven from the top, but again, it's that expectation, understanding, listening to what our people have to say, and finding out the best way to communicate.
Thank you.
Mr. Thompson, what's your greatest asset that you would bring to the position? And I'm going to follow it up with your liability, so if you want to just...
I think my greatest asset is my diverse background. My experiences have been something I wouldn't trade for the world. I'm almost 43 years old and spent 25 and a half years in the Marine Corps. I've had an exceptional career, loved every minute of it in education, from a teacher to assistant principal to a principal and to where I'm at now. I love my job. So I think the greatest aspect is the diverse background, but honing in, really thinking about leadership again and learning from past leaders and mentors, always building my own internal 5-year plan. One of my old directors always asked, "Top, what's your 5-year plan?" And every year it changed. So, but leading people, it was always there. That was always part of that 5-year plan. And here I sit. I'm within that 5-year window, you know, I'm here interviewing, and it's a feel good. It's just, you feel accomplished. You think back about your whole career and what got you here, and even starting from your upbringing from your parents and the work ethic that was instilled at such a young age, and how that's tied into the rest of your life through all your experiences. So understanding leadership and what it takes to be a successful leader and what it takes to be that pinnacle level 5 leader. And then liability.
The hard parts, what liability would you bring?
I'm clumsy. There's always a liability part of the job. And I think I don't like to look at it as a liability. I think tough decisions drive you into situations that put you in a more liable situation. And I think understanding, and I don't mean lead by an iron fist. That's not what I mean at all. But I think that making those hard decisions sometimes are hard for people. And I think the liability standpoint behind that comes with it, whether you go to an impartial hearing officer that's hearing a case because of decisions you made, or whether it's something that's a smaller decision, I mean, there's a liability part of that. And I think every director of schools experiences it. And that's probably, on a lot of the decision making, it's probably the hardest one, and the one that you're constantly seeking legal guidance. So in terms of liability, my mind always goes there. So that would be my, I don't want that to sound negative, but it's you just, making decisions puts you in a liable position all the time.
Okay.
So our last question is going to be given to you and asked by Veronica.
So as the student liaison, it is my job to speak on behalf of the students and voice their concerns to the board, and also to ensure that their voices are heard. With this in mind, I would like to know, in what ways will you value and honor student voice as the superintendent?
Students are in the trenches. So when we want to know something, a lot of times the best place to hear it from are the students. And the best way to make change is by listening to the students. Because every decision we make, every decision I'll make as a director of schools has to be measured in student benefit. And if the decisions we make aren't being measured in student benefit, then we don't need them. But in order to do that, we have to listen to the students. Teachers listen to students every day. Take, for instance, the high school this year. Survey went out in regards to graduation. Why? Mr. Minton wanted to know, what was the student's stance? What was the student's viewpoint on graduation? They listened. So in saying that, I remember lighting. There was a question about lighting some months back behind the school. Director, listen, you got some lighting back there. So it may be a very minute thing, toilet paper in the bathrooms, to something as great as graduation on all ends. And we can listen to students from our earliest, youngest children all the way to our seniors. They all have opinions as well. And a lot of times we need to listen, because like I said, y'all are in the trenches. You're all the ones doing the hard work. You're all the ones becoming better citizens. So we're in a changing society, and we have to listen, adjust, work together. And it's an open door. And as you as the liaison, as you bring things to us, I mean, I think that's awesome. I think it's awesome. And it gives you all a definite voice.
Thank you.
This question, I know you're heavy in pre-K and elementary where you were a principal. Haven't had a lot of experience other than teaching middle school and high school. How would you make sure that you were up to date on what needed to happen, what you need to look for at the high school, and make sure we're on graduation rate, everything like that? So what are you going to do to to make sure we stay on top of our game at those levels.
Absolutely, at the high school level, and that's one thing we track. That's one thing we can look at in the human capital report. We push out, where do we stand? Elizabethton's pretty high when it comes to grad rate and moving on to post-secondary education, and that's important. And it's not just going to college, it's going to trade schools, joining the military. And so things that we can do, number one is track. There's a lot of guidance that's involved in that, a lot of mentoring from inside the school. It takes a lot of conversation between the administration, how it's set up, and how it's being delivered to school as we're coaching our children on what routes to go. One thing was securing the application for ROTC. I mean, that's important. A grad rate for ROTC programs, an average, runs well above 95%. It's another important aspect. Maybe it's the trade schools as we're pushing our CTE program. We don't want to overemphasize and put all our eggs in basket on one section. We want a diverse equity. I mean, if you think about trades now, the push on the trade side, and I'm not down in college, I've had a lot of college experiences, but we have to make it equal. Students have in their mind, and again, it's talking to them, where do they want to go? What are they driven by? Where do they want to be? So keeping our students, keeping our faculty, and that conversation going between the building administrators and the district office here, as well as the superintendent. I mean, it's huge. We're tracked on that. We're accountable for that. And it's important that conversation stays going. We support it.
Hey Travis, in light of the coronavirus, how would you approach the reopening of the schools?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah, I know, but how would,
It's,
somebody's going to have to hit the ground running when they take this position.
Sure, looking at the guidance and talking, there's a lot of talk. We'd love for the first district to be able to do something together and be on the same, kind of like the reopening of athletics recently. First district got together, compiled a plan, and everybody's on the same page. So it'd be great to do that. I know there's been discussion in that. There's more discussion up in our area. Well, even you take Metro Nashville, for instance, they're going to reopen as normal. Now, you've got benchmarks and different categories set aside if there's spikes. So I think we've got a survey that's going to be going out to our parents to get their take on it, how they feel. If that comes back fairly strong, we look at possibly opening as normal. We get our one-to-one capability, which we're looking at as well, and a lot of training on our devices. And then if for some reason there's a spike and we have to shut down, or the guidance is we need to shut down, then there's no loss of instruction. We go straight to online. And that's something we're working pretty hard on right now to come up with those different scenarios per se on how to do it. But a lot of people and a lot of other directors and people I've talked to, even down as far as Chattanooga area, they're looking pretty strongly at going back as normal. I may have danced around that more.
Well,
but
that's a tough question.
It's hard, and we can blink in a day, something changes and we get a complete difference of guidance coming out from the state or our lawmakers. So it's keeping up with what's going on, having a plan, and be ready for that plan to nosedive. And you got to go scenario 2. Yeah.
Because it's approaching us pretty fast.
It is. We're 30-some days out, I think, from the next school year.
It's going to be here pretty quick.
You have any questions for us?
What's the vision of the board for the next 5 years? Where do you all see, where do you see the direction of this board in regards to where we're at now and where we might be or where you might want it to be in 5 years?
You all get to talk too.
Speaking on behalf of myself, and that's the problem, is because I don't know that we have an articulated mission and vision, and we've had an articulated 5-year plan, which I know you've been privy to, but I think in large, broad terms, we want to see the district come together for the things that you mentioned in regards to the best interest of the students. It has to be measured in student outcomes, and some of those outcomes are state-reported numbers like graduation rates, and other things that keying off things that I'm sure you're well familiar with is the diversification of opportunities.
Yes.
You particularly have brought to us the ROTC program, and it's on a silver platter if we can afford to do it. It's those types of initiatives that I think that we see, whether it be CTE, but we want our students to be college and career ready when they leave here. And Mr. Alexander sitting out there, and he said once, to have our students be good citizens of this community. I think that's always been our vision. I think that we want to be excel at what we do, and we have some ideas to get there. Some of which involve T.A. Duggar, trying to work with T.A. Duggar to bring it up to par and to make it better than it ever has been, but at the same time, keeping the programs that we already have, like the XQ, going well and continuing to excel. So I think that would be the things I would incorporate into that vision if we ever articulate it into a unified body as a whole.
Okay. Thank you.
I think, go ahead, Danny. I talk all the
I'll
time.
just say, Dr. May hit a lot of it on the head. We need to do what's best for our students and continue to see our students improve in all aspects of their studies, whether it be CTE, going to college, or going to work. I'd like to see more certifications pushed down to the high school, where when they do graduate, they are and can go to work because they have those certifications or those skills they need, instead of having to go to any type of college, post-secondary school. Expand the CTE. I think we're working on that because we know there are a lot of trade jobs out there now that pay high wages, make a good living doing that. And facility-wise, continue to improve. Look at like Dr. May said, let's get T.A. Duggar where it needs to be, and then look at other facilities and decide what we need to do there to get them where they need to be. So. Everything should be student-focused, whether it's safety of the building, safety of the campuses, opportunities for the students. That's my vision.
Yes. Good.
For me, I've had one of the nice things about a little bit of longevity is you get some perspective, and I think of where we were. I've been sitting here for 14 years, and the student, they've changed. The way we teach has changed, and it changed so quickly. And I love the idea that we're always pushing ahead. We have wonderful foundations to build on. Mr. Alexander, when he was director, left Dr. Gardenauer a great foundation to build on. And Dr. Gardenauer has built on that, and he's going to leave the next director a great foundation to build on. So we're always pushing forward. I never want us to ever look back and go, well, let's go back, or, well, we're fine here, let's just stay here.
Absolutely.
I think, you can look back fondly, but it's always forward. And one of the really cool things is I love having, I think Veronica is our 5th liaison, and I've watched that role change because I love the fact that, and I think XQ has done a great job of fostering that mentality in students, is that you don't just go to a building and stay there and go home and be quiet. You go in that building and you get your voice, you find your voice, and then this community has given students an opportunity to speak with confidence and to know that they're not our leaders of the future, they're our leaders right now. And that really makes me excited. And when my last day on this board, whenever that happens, that's the thing I think I'm probably going to be the most proud of, is that this town, like I said this earlier, we value our school system, but we value the students. And we've never had anybody ever say anything like, why do you have a student up there? This never happened. I think we're very proud of that.
Yeah.
And I think the high school is proud of that. And they take it serious. It's not a popularity contest. It is, they see that for what it is. And so the fact that we value our children, whatever age they are, will just make Elizabethton a great place to live in the future as it is now. So it's that looking at who we are. As a parent, all of us are parents, and all of our kids got a great education in this system. And I want to give that to all the other people who have kids who are, 1 to 18, wherever they are. So it is that constant moving forward. All right. If there's nothing else, we're going to let you chat with everybody that's here, and then we're going to break at noon for lunch and be back here at 1 o'clock. So Mr. Thompson is available to talk to everybody. Travis, thank you.